Let's go through one of the clearest and most logical ways to handle d4 as black. The moves are intuitive, the ideas are simple, and there's nothing to memorize. Just plans you can use right away. e5 is the most obvious reply. It takes the center and gets your pieces ready to develop. Playing knight f6 is a bit too subtle for a beginner. Now after c4, if we accept the gambit with the idea of keeping the extra pawn, we can easily get in trouble. For instance, after a4, a6 fails because the rook on a8 is hanging. And if we go for c6, then a takes b, and we run into queen f3, trapping our rook. This is an excellent proof for every beginner that the pawn should not be taken. Now comes the bigger question. Do we want to defend our pawn on d5? Well, if we don't, white can capture, force our queen to d5, and use that tempo to develop and take control of the center. And since beginners already understand that development and the center matter, this makes perfect sense. From my experience, many chess beginners and even intermediate level players like to defend d5 with a knight instead. But if white takes on d5, the knight ends up there, where it can be kicked away with e4, and black gives up the center again. So the only healthy option is to defend the d5 pawn with another pawn, either with e6 or c6. Getting inside a beginner's mind, I believe that e6 makes more sense, simply because c6 doesn't really help any piece develop. It even takes away the c6 square from the knight on b8. Meanwhile, e6 frees the bishop on f8, and that's important because we want to castle soon. The c8 bishop becomes a bit unhappy for the moment, but we're going to fix that later. So my recommendation is to go with the more intuitive move e6. Now let's assume white is also a beginner, but knows a bit of theory and plays the best move, knight c3. If you know basic opening principles, you probably already understand what you should do here. Your only real question might be, which minor piece should I develop first? I'd like to suggest one of the opening guidelines that deserves to be remembered. Develop knights before bishops. This is because knights usually have obvious squares, while bishops often depend on how your opponent sets up their position. Here it's crystal clear. The kingside knight belongs on f6. It was true on move 1, it's true on move 3, and will still be true on move 10. Therefore, knight f6 should be played. Now, a lot of beginners love the idea of pinning the knight. An experienced player knows this pin doesn't do anything. Even if black doubles the c-pawn, white can undouble right away with c takes d, and black just gave up the bishop pair for nothing. But that explanation is too heavy for a beginner. There is a simpler way to see the problem. Ask yourself, what happens when you finally develop your knight to f6 and white pins it with bishop g5? I've seen countless beginners retreating to e7 just to break this counterpin, much more dangerous than the one against the c3 knight. Because the knight cannot move, and if you move away your queen first, you get doubled f-pawns, and your king, which is going to be on g8 by then, suddenly sits on an open file. So we play knight f6, keeping an option to break the same pin when white plays bishop g5 with the move bishop e7. That move is also required because white was threatening to take on d5 and then take on f6, forcing us to weaken our kingside pawn structure. So we definitely play bishop e7, entering the main line of the queen's gambit declined. White continues with e3, defending the c4 pawn and getting ready to bring their kingside pieces into the game. We simply castle and white develops their knight. The first thing we notice is our inactive bishop on c8. Then we look at our undeveloped knight. And finally we see that white has a bit more space in the center, which makes our position feel slightly constricted. From that perspective, a move like knight e4, although interesting at first glance, doesn't really fix anything. Plus it goes against the guideline of not moving the same piece twice in the opening. Another move we should rule out is taking on c4. It's much better to wait until white develops their bishop to d3. That way we earn a free move. So the real question becomes, what should we develop in the meantime? Let's look at our bad bishop and think about how it might eventually become active. One idea is to play b6, put it on b7 and then take on c4. And suddenly the bishop is alive. Another perspective is to start with our knight. Placing it on c6 might look optimal at first. It goes toward the center, it's active. But in reality it blocks our bishop that wants to reach b7, and also the c-pawn, which would like to advance to c5 at some point to challenge white's center. We come to the conclusion that the knight actually belongs on d7. Now whether you play b6 or knight bd7 first is up to you. Either way, you're thinking in the right direction and your plan makes sense. But since knight bd7 keeps things more flexible, I'm going with that move. White may delay developing their bishop and play something like rook c1 or queen c2, thinking, well, black is going to take on c4 anyway, so why waste the tempo on bishop d3? Here's what you should know. In those cases, black should also delay taking on c4. You only capture on c4 once you see bishop d3 or bishop e2 on the board. But if we assume white is a beginner, you'll probably see bishop d3 played right away. Of course, this is the moment to take on c4. Now we have two options. We can either play a6 first, then b5 and bishop b7, or go straight for b6 and bishop b7. Either way, your thinking is solid. We are catching up in development and overall piece activity is improving. Our b7 bishop has gone from the worst piece on the board to the best. But there's still one thing to deal with. White is slightly stronger in the center. How do we fix that? Well, the most obvious and natural way is to challenge it with the pawn, meaning c5. That's an option you can play on the next move, solving the last problem in your setup. And that's it. Your opening preparation against the Queen's Gambit is basically done. You know the plan, you see the logic, and it all feels intuitive. Of course, in a real game, things rarely go exactly like this against beginners. Most likely they'll deviate sooner, playing suboptimal moves. When that happens, compare their moves with the main line to find out what they neglected and what additional options are possibly available to you. Now, there's another huge branch of the Queen's Gambit that some beginners may have been told to play with white, the exchange variation. With black, you simply develop your kingside as usual. Castle, straighten your pawn structure with c6, and then pause to think about the next step, mainly what to do with your queenside pieces. But first there is a small problem to fix. The h7 pawn is hanging. The move h6 is perfectly fine, but there's also knight bd7, which indirectly protects h7. Then the idea is to free the light square bishop, which can happen either by maneuvering the knight to b6 or by sending it to f8 and later g6. Many will choose knight b6 simply because it looks faster. The knight f8 to g6 route seems long, plus the rook has to move. But if you think a bit further, you realize the rook wants to come to e8 because there is a semi-open file. And once your knight lands on g6, you're well prepared for a kingside attack. If you feel a bit overwhelmed by all these moves, maneuvers and plans, that's completely normal. I'm intentionally going a little ahead of where you are at the moment. But the important part is this: the opening is over, you've created no weaknesses, all your pieces are active, and your pawn structure is solid. That means the opening was well played. And now the last thing we need to check, the infamous London system, extremely common among beginners. After knight f3, we follow the same logic. When the bishop goes to f4, we start thinking about how to continue developing the kingside. And suddenly we notice a problem. e6 would block our bishop. Before, in the Queen's Gambit, we needed to play e6 because the d5 pawn was under pressure. Here, however, nothing is attacking it, so why not develop the bishop first? Most likely your opponent will play e3, and we continue the same way. Now the move white should play is c4. That's the only way to fight for any kind of advantage. On high levels, whenever the bishop leaves c8 and the knight on b8 is still undeveloped, this c-pawn push is thematic, because white wants queen b3, hitting b7 and d5. But for you, the whole high-level theory part is irrelevant. What is relevant is this. If white in the London system plays c4, queen b3 is coming, and you must be ready for it. And here is something incredibly interesting you can do. A little trick worth remembering because it's really cool. After c4, you take on b1 immediately. White recaptures, and now you give a check on b4. And believe it or not, king e2 is the only move. There's no chance a beginner finds that. What about the obvious knight e2? Well, that loses instantly to knight e4, because the knight on d2 is gone. Now in reality, white usually plays bishop d3 here, and after trading there is nothing to worry about. And that's it. If you're a beginner watching this video, let me know whether you're planning to use these ideas in your opening repertoire. And if you have already tried them, tell me how it went.